Hans had worked for his boss for 7 years, so one day he said, "Boss, my time here is done. I want to go back home to my mom. Can you give me my payment?" The boss replied, "You've been loyal and hardworking, so I'll reward you well." Then he handed Hans a huge piece of gold, as big as his head. Hans pulled out his handkerchief, wrapped the gold in it, threw it over his shoulder, and started walking home. As Hans walked, step by step, he saw a man riding by on a cheerful, lively horse. The man looked so comfortable and happy. Hans thought aloud, "Wow, riding a horse must be amazing. It's like sitting in a chair while moving. No tripping over rocks, no wearing out your shoes, and you get where you're going so much faster." The rider heard him and stopped. "Hey there, Hans. Why are you walking when you could be riding?" "Well," Hans replied, "I have to carry this heavy lump all the way home. It's gold, sure, but it's so heavy my shoulder hurts, and I can't even hold my head up straight." The rider grinned and said, "I'll tell you what, let's trade. I'll give you my horse, and you give me your gold." Hans lit up. "Really? Deal. But I'll warn you, carrying this lump isn't easy. You'll feel it." The rider got off his horse, took the gold, and helped Hans climb onto the saddle. Then he handed Hans the reins and said, "If you want the horse to go faster, just click your tongue and say, 'Jup, jup.'" Hans was thrilled as he rode off on the horse, feeling bold and free. After a while, he thought, this horse should go faster. So he started clicking his tongue and calling, "Jup, jup." The horse sped up into a bouncy trot, and before Hans knew it, he was flying off the saddle and landed right in a ditch by the road. The horse would have run off if a farmer hadn't been passing by with the cow and stopped it. Hans picked himself up, feeling sore and annoyed. He turned to the farmer and said, "Riding isn't all it's cracked up to be, especially with a horse like this that throws you off. I could have broken my neck. I'm done with riding. Your cow looks way better. You can walk behind her peacefully, and she gives milk, butter, and cheese every day. That's way more useful. I'd trade this horse for a cow in a heartbeat." The farmer laughed and said, "If it makes you happy, I'll trade you my cow for your horse." Hans couldn't believe his luck and quickly agreed. The farmer hopped on the horse and rode off, while Hans happily led the cow down the road. As Hans walked along, he thought, "What a great deal. I'll never go hungry now. As long as I've got a bit of bread, I can have butter and cheese with it. And if I'm thirsty, I can just milk the cow and drink. Life couldn't be better." After a while, Hans stopped at a small inn, ate all of the food he had with him for both lunch and dinner, and spent his last few coins on half a glass of beer. Feeling satisfied, he continued leading the cow toward his mother's village. By midday, the sun was blazing, and Hans found himself crossing a hot, dry moor. He was sweating and so thirsty his mouth felt glued shut. No problem, he thought. I'll just milk the cow and have a nice drink. He tied the cow to a scraggly tree, took off his leather cap to use as a bucket, and tried to milk her. But no matter how hard he worked, not a single drop came out. The cow, annoyed by his clumsy attempts, finally kicked him in the head with her hind leg. Poor Hans fell to the ground, dazed and wondering what had just happened. Just then, a butcher came by, pushing a wheelbarrow with a young pig inside. He stopped to help Hans up and asked what had happened. Hans explained the whole story. The butcher handed him a flask of water and said, "Take a drink and calm down. That cow's too old to give milk. It's only good for pulling a plow or being sold for meat." Hans sighed and said, "Well, I guess it's still useful for beef, but I'm not a big fan of beef. It's too tough." Now, a juicy young pig like that one you've got? That's delicious. And imagine all the sausages. The butcher grinned and said, "Tell you what, I'll trade you my pig for your cow." Hans lit up. "Really? That'd be amazing. Thank you so much." He handed over the cow, and the butcher untied the pig from the wheelbarrow, giving Hans the rope to lead it. Feeling on top of the world, Hans continued down the road with the pig. Everything's going my way. Even when something goes wrong, it all works out in the end. Not long after, Hans met a young man carrying a big, plump white goose. They greeted each other, and Hans couldn't resist bragging about all the great trades he'd made that day. The young man told Hans he was taking the goose to a christening feast. "Feel how heavy she is," the boy said, lifting the goose by her wings. "She's been fattened up for weeks. Whoever gets to eat her will be wiping grease off their face." Hans weighed the goose in his hand and said, "She's impressive for sure, but my pig's no small prize either." The boy looked around nervously, glancing from side to side, and then said, "Listen, there might be a problem with your pig. In the village I just passed through, the mayor's pig was stolen from its pen. I'm worried that your pig could be the stolen one. They've already sent people out to look for it, and if they catch you with it, you'll be in big trouble. At the very least, you'll end up locked in jail." Hans' face went pale. "Oh no, please help me out of this mess. You know this area better than I do. Take my pig and give me your goose instead." The boy hesitated and then said, "I might be taking a risk here, but I don't want to see you get in trouble." He took the pig's leash, quickly led it down a side path, and disappeared. Hans, now feeling relieved and carefree, walked along with the goose tucked under his arm. "When I really think about it," he said to himself, "this trade is a win for me. First, I'll get some delicious roast goose. Then there'll be so much fat dripping that I'll have enough to spread on my bread for months. And let's not forget the beautiful white feathers. I'll stuff my pillow with them, and I'll sleep like a baby. My mom is going to be so happy. As Hans walked through the next village, he saw a scissors grinder working at his sharpening wheel. The man was cheerfully singing, "I sharpen scissors and grind away. My coat flaps behind me all day." Hans stopped to watch him and finally said, "You seem pretty happy with your work." "Why wouldn't I be?" the scissors grinder replied. "This trade is as good as gold. A real grinder always has coins in his pocket whenever he reaches for them. But hey, where'd you get that fine goose?" "Oh, I didn't buy it. I traded my pig for it." "And where'd you get the pig?" "I traded it for a cow." "And the cow?" "I swapped it for a horse." "And the horse?" "I gave a lump of gold as big as my head for it." "And where'd you get the gold?" "That was my pay for 7 years of hard work." "You've really got a knack for getting what you want," said the grinder. "If you can just figure out how to always have coins jingling in your pocket, you'll be set for life." Hans's eyes lit up. "How can I do that?" he asked. "Simple," said the grinder. "Become a grinder like me. You don't need much, just a grindstone. I've got one right here. It's a bit worn, but it'll do the job. I'll give it to you in exchange for your goose. What do you say?" "Are you kidding?" Hans replied. "That's the best deal ever. If I'll always have money in my pocket, I'll never have to worry about anything again." Without a second thought, Hans handed over the goose and took the grindstone. The grinder then picked up a heavy rock lying nearby and said, "Here, take this stone too. It's solid and useful. You can use it to hammer or straighten nails. Keep it safe." Hans happily loaded the stones onto his back and set off, feeling on top of the world. "I must be the luckiest guy alive," he exclaimed. "It's like everything just falls into place for me, like I was born on a Sunday." But as the day wore on, Hans started to feel the weight of the stones. He had been walking since morning, and his legs were getting tired. On top of that, he was starving because he'd already eaten all his food earlier when he got the cow. Now, every step felt harder, and he had to stop constantly to catch his breath. The grindstone and the rock felt heavier with every step, and he couldn't help but wish he didn't have to carry them anymore. Finally, Hans spotted a well in the middle of a field. "Perfect," he thought. "I'll take a break and get a drink of water." When he reached the well, he carefully set the stones down on the edge so they wouldn't get damaged while he rested. He sat down, leaned over to drink, and accidentally nudged the stones. Before he could grab them, both stones tumbled into the well and sank straight to the bottom. For a moment, Hans stared in surprise. Then, instead of being upset, he jumped up and shouted with joy. "Thank you, thank you," he cried, tears of relief streaming down his face. "What a blessing! I'm finally free of those heavy things. They were the only trouble I had, and now they're gone." Feeling lighter than ever, Hans took off running, no longer burdened by anything. He made his way home to his mother with a heart full of joy and a spring in his step, convinced that he was the luckiest person in the world.